Thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage. In this video, we will be installing the piston rings and pistons. And I'm using Total Seal file to fit piston rings. Now I'm going to check the gap anyway just to see what they are to make sure they're okay, because they do come in standard sizes, but I'm going to check anyway. And if you do use file to fit piston rings, make sure you get the proper tool. This is the tool you use to file the end of the ring. It's totally worth it because you will never do it by hand with a file and get it square and get the rings even on both sides. So do yourself a favor, get one of these tools and file the rings the proper way, and I'm going to go through that steps that I do. I'm not going to go through this, I have this in another video so you can go watch that, but basically fitting the rings to the pistons. But first we start with cleaning out all of the cylinders to make sure they're free of dirt, grime, dust, anything, to make sure they're nice and clean. First things first, we have to check the gap on the piston rings, and remember, always follow the manufacturer's recommendations if it comes in the packaging. If you don't have that general rule, you take the diameter of the cylinder, in my case it's 3.380 inches, multiply that by 0.004, and I get my top gap of 0.014 or 14 thousandths for the top, 3.380 times 0.005 for the second groove, which should be 17 thousandths. I have a second groove ring here, sitting in there. I'm going to even it off with the piston just to make sure it's in there straight, like that. And I'm going to check here. Start at 8 thousandths. 8 thousandths doesn't fit. We'll try a 7 thousandths. 7 thousandths doesn't go in all the way. 6 thousandths doesn't go in all the way. 5. Okay, 5 thousandths goes in all the way. I need it to be 17 thousandths, which means I'm going to have to hand grind all of the rings for all of the, at least the second, which I'm going to say that the first isn't going to fit either. Here's my top ring. Let me put that in here. And we'll set that flat. And we'll start at 5. Geez, 5 doesn't even go in. It's really tight. Try this. Boy, 3 thousandths. So it's fair to say they're all going to have to be checked. All checked and fitted. Now I've got both rings, my top ring and my second ring, ground to the proper gap. The question is, which way do you put them in? And like I said, if the directions come with the rings, always follow the manufacturer's recommendations. But if you're looking for a general rule of thumb, now that groove, if you have a ring and it's got a little groove on it, that groove actually makes the ring twist or bend like a Belleville washer. You want your second ring, you want that to bend down. So your second ring, there's a dot on the ring, that goes up. There's no dot, that groove on the ring has got to go down, because you want the bottom ring or the second ring to twist down. On the top ring, the dot will go up if you have a dot. If you don't have a dot, the bevel on that faces up, because you want the top ring, when you compress it, to twist up. Now after I finish grinding my rings, and since they're file to fit for each cylinder, they might be slightly different, I like to put them right on the piston that I ground for that particular piston to make sure that they go in the right hole that they were ground for. Here's one more thing I'd like to share with you. If you have someone put your rods and pistons together and you have this type of piston here, look really close. Where this is milled out for the connecting rod, or the pin here, where this is milled out, there is an extremely thin land right here. And that's where the oil rail goes. The oil rail and the oil wiper goes in here. And if you have a hard time getting that in, and it doesn't spin, it's because this little lip here got knocked, and it probably got bent into the groove here for the oil wiper and the oil rails, and you might have to bend that back a little bit. So you want to check that just to make sure it's not bent. If you're having a hard time, look for that. One more thing. After you file your rings to fit and you get the gap, there's going to be a burr, and you're going to feel it. You got to knock that burr off of there. On the top side, bottom side, make sure you lightly remove that burr. And on the inside of the groove, you also have to make sure there isn't a burr. Just check it on the outside. Just make sure you don't feel any burrs. Lightly just take those off. Not a lot, just enough to remove the burr. And the way you're going to check, you're going to take your piston and you're just going to put that in the groove and make sure that, first of all, well, this is the second groove. So make sure that it fits in the groove. You want to make sure that there's no burr, so that you want to make sure that the ring moves freely in that groove. If there's a burr, it won't move freely, and that could be a problem. So if you have the burr removed, it'll move nice and smooth, and you'll be able to fit the gap will go inside the groove. Make sure you use some piston ring expansion pliers to put them on. You open up the ring. Be careful you don't scratch the side of the piston. You gotta take your time to do this. Don't slide it over. See how I got that? Don't slide that over, because you can crack these rings. So you gotta be careful. See how I got that? It's kind of off there. So I'm gonna take this off and make sure I do it right. That one took a little bit of work because it's so far down on the piston. But if you take your time and open these rings up just right, if you open up and get it close, you can just lightly lift up and get it in place. It'll go right in the groove. Then, since these are filed to fit for each cylinder, as soon as I get the piston all set and the gap set for the rings, I like to install it immediately, just so they don't get mixed up with other pistons. One thing I will mention is that when I was putting these pistons together, I showed a picture of my bearings, and there were fingerprints all over the bearing. Make sure before you put these together and put any lube on there, you wipe off the grease, degrease the bearing, take off those fingerprints, because your fingerprints and the oils on your hands can be acidic, salt, whatever, and cause that to rust. So just wipe it off with a degreaser, isopropyl alcohol, or lacquer thinner, or whatever. Just get all that fingerprint off there before you install them. Then you can clock the rings, which just means alternating the gaps on the rings so that they're not all in the same spot like that. You don't want them all right together, straight in a line. So you have a gap for the rail there. You rotate the second ring so it's a third of the way around, and then the top ring a third of the way around, so the gaps are staggered. First, a light coat of engine oil around the top. Get down there a couple inches, and especially around the edge where you need the rings to slide in. Now I do have the bearing out so that when I push it in, it doesn't fall out. I'll put that in after I get the piston installed. Again, chamfer, big chamfer on the rods going towards the counterweight. And you want to try and do it in one continuous motion. I have the crankshaft underneath. The crankshaft is turned out of the way so that I don't run the risk of driving the piston and the rod into the crankshaft. And if the piston pops out or one of the rings pops out, stop and redo it. assembly lube on the bearing, and I will gently put it into the rod, make sure my lock notch is lined up. Now I can bring my crankshaft around, line it up, the piston, again my bearing cap nice and clean, assembly lube on there, make sure you put it together right, lock notch to lock notch. Always tighten things down by hand, don't use any impact tools, because you want to be able to feel if there are any problems. These are ARP rod bolts, so make sure you're following the instructions that came with it, which means the ARP assembly lube, the ARP Ultra Torque, which also goes under the head of the bolt. I'm just going to get these hand tight. Not much, just a little snug. I'm going to test to make sure everything rolls right before I crank them down and torque it. Now I can just turn it over. Everything moves nice and smooth. Now the other thing I'm checking for here is, since this is a stroker crank, I'm looking for my stroker clearance all the way around. You want to make sure you have at least, geez, at least 1/8 of an inch, if not more. And most stroker cranks require some clearance machining for the rod bolt. This rod bolt comes around, and as it gets towards that, the cylinder down there, it usually gets close and you have to do some clearance, but for some reason this stroker crank doesn't require any clearance, and I went to the website, and the company that makes this kit claims that you can install this stroker crank on a weekend and just put it in on a weekend and go. So apparently there's no stroker clearance required, and as I go around, there's at least 3/16, if not 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and the piston was nice and smooth inside that cylinder. Now I will do the piston opposite of this to make sure that this journal and this side is okay. Again, only hand tight for the second one. It's a little snug. And I'll give another check, make sure that both pistons are moving freely. Okay, nice and smooth for both of them. Now we can torque it down. Torque spec is 63 foot-pounds, so I'll do it in 2 stages. Do it to 30. Then to 63. Still rotates nice and smooth. All right, 6 to go. Once you get the first couple in, it's just repeating it for the rest of the 8, or the other 6. And now as I rotate it, everything rotates nice and smooth. A measure of how good your assembly is how much torque, or how many foot-pounds does it take to get the engine started rotating. I have a transducer on here, and we'll see how much it takes to get this engine moving. 31.6. 31.6 foot-pounds to get it moving. 33.2. I'll go all the way around and get a couple more measurements here. I'll stop it, and then we'll take a look. 32.8. Pretty consistent all the way around. Got all the pistons installed, and the engine rotates nice and free. Don't forget every time you finish working on your engine to cover it up to make sure nothing falls inside. You don't want dust building out, especially if you're not going to be working on it for a few days. So next I think we'll be doing maybe the timing chain. I got to set up the girdle, lots of stuff. So stick around. Thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage.